Welcome to the deep dive. This where we take some really insightful source material, break it down, and basically give you the shortcuts to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're looking at a concept that's, well, it really changes how you think about effort, about results, maybe even the universe itself. It's kind of wonky, but in a very, very powerful way. We are diving deep into the 80-20 principle. You might know it as the Pareto principle. If you've ever wondered, how you can get way more done with less effort, or maybe why things in life just never seem to balance out neatly, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
It absolutely is. Yeah, our mission today is really to unpack a comprehensive guide to this 80-20 principle. We want to explore what it actually is, look at its, frankly, surprising uses in business, but also in your personal life, and figure out what it means to be properly informed by it. The goal is really to pull out the most important nuggets of wisdom from the source material we looked at so you get a shortcut to understanding this powerful idea.
Okay, fantastic. Let's jump right in then. Foundational question. What is the 80-20 principle at its core?
Well, at its heart, the 80-20 principle is this observation, and it's quite striking, that in many, many situations, roughly 80% of the effects, the results, the outcomes they come from, only about 20% of the causes. It's a pattern that just keeps showing up. Kind of hidden sometimes, but it's there. And it's important because it tells us, fundamentally, that effort and outcome, they're rarely equal. We tend to think in like 50-50 terms, right? Equal input, equal output. But this principle reveals a really profound imbalance.
That is a huge shift, isn't it? Because we're often taught, maybe from childhood, that equal effort gets equal results. Everything's linear. How does this force us to rethink those basic ideas?
Yeah, it just shatters that linear thinking.
Yeah.
Take a simple example, something relatable. The source material talks about, like beer drinkers. There's this classic pattern where a small percentage of drinkers actually consume a huge percentage of the beer. Now, the point isn't just, a fun fact about beer. It's that most of the consumption or sales or whatever often comes from a tiny minority of users or customers. So if you're in business, say marketing or sales, this means finding and really focusing on that vital few can be so much more effective than just like casting a wide net. It's about putting resources where they make the biggest splash.
Right. Leveraging things properly. So, okay, given this imbalance, what can the principle actually do for you in your work, maybe your personal life?
Well, in business, it's been pretty transformative. There were sort of waves of adoption. The first big one was during the quality revolution. Companies figured out, hey, wait, a small fraction of defects are causing most of our problems. So focus there. Made a huge difference. And now we're deep in what the source calls the second wave, the information revolution. And it notes this one has a long way to run. Still lots of potential there.
It's really interesting that the source calls it still the best kept business secret. If it's that powerful, why do you think it's still sort of under the radar for so many businesses? And why does it work so well when people do use it?
Well, it works because business is just full of these uneven distributions, isn't it? Sales, profits, customer value. Even how much different employees contribute. It's all uneven. Why is it a secret? Maybe because it requires a different way of thinking. You have to be willing to question your assumptions about where the real value is coming from. It's not always obvious. Companies that do use it well, they raise profits by looking for what the force calls these irregular insights, things that don't fit the neat 50-50 model. Okay, so take Electronic Instruments, Inc., an example from the material. They did an internal analysis, sales and profits by product. And guess what? A surprisingly small number of products were driving the vast majority of sales and profits. The insight there is huge. Instead of trying to make every product a little bit better, you focus your energy, your R&D, your marketing on those few winners. And you might even need to cut the losers, the ones dragging things down. And it's the same with customers. Their data showed, for Electronic Instruments, Inc., that a tiny fraction of customers brought in most of the money. This leads to this really crucial idea. Segmentation is the key to understanding and driving up profitability. You have to break it down. See which customer groups, which segments are really paying the bills. Then you can make a strategic diagnosis, figure out who your best customers are, what your best products are, and take action. It's about, as the source says, developing your firm into a different animal, one that's much more focused and effective. Another good one is Strategy Consulting, Inc. They looked at their projects and clients. Big difference in profitability. Large projects, long-term clients, way more profitable than the smaller, newer ones, disproportionately so. And even looking at project types, some were just much more lucrative than others. So the clear takeaway is, right, put your best people, your best resources on those high-impact areas. Don't treat every client or every project the same.
That's a massive takeaway for anyone listening who's in business. Find the gold, double down on the gold. But there's a warning in the source, too. It says, don't take 80/20 analysis to simplistic conclusions. What does that really mean? What are the traps here?
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. It absolutely definitely does not mean you just, slash 80% of your products or fire 80% of your customers overnight. That'd be, well, simplistic and probably disastrous. The nuance is it's a guide for deep analysis.
Yeah.
It's about understanding why these imbalances exist. What are the underlying reasons? It's about finding leverage points, identifying those vital few inputs that if you tweak them or maybe eliminate them, you get massive results. It's a tool for smart redesign, not just crude cutting. And often this deep analysis points towards something else. Simple is beautiful, complex is ugly. The source talks about the cost of complexity, how adding layers and extra steps often just adds overhead without adding real value.
Right, and it has that really provocative line about complexity, calling the idea of contribution to overhead one of the lamest excuses for inaction. Why do you think that's seen as such a lame excuse, and why do managers sometimes seem to, well, almost like complexity? Is it job security or...
Oof. Yeah, lamest excuse. That hits hard because complexity can definitely be used to hide inefficiency, right? It makes it harder to see what's really going on, and it gives people a reason not to change things, even if those things aren't working well. Why do managers sometimes embrace it? Could be several things. Maybe it makes them feel essential, like they're mastering this complex system. Or maybe they genuinely think complex issues need complex answers. But the 80/20 principle really pushes you towards clarity, towards simplicity. When you apply it properly, you naturally start finding ways to strip out unnecessary complexity and cost. Like the example of the publisher's typesetting, overruns. They found like 80% of the extra costs came from just 20% of the reasons. So they tackled those few root causes. Huge savings. And sometimes you see variations, like the 505 principle, where maybe just 5% of the causes drive 50% of the effects. It shows the ratio isn't always exactly 80/20, but that imbalance, that's the constant factor. And it's not just about profit either. The principle has really broad business applications. The material lists the top 10 business applications. It covers things like making better decisions by focusing analysis on the key factors, streamlining inventory so you're not holding tons of slow-moving stock, managing projects better by focusing on the critical tasks, even things like negotiation, focusing on the few points that really matter. And yeah, it even gives tips on getting a pay raise by showing how your 20% of effort delivers 80% of the value.
Okay, wow. So we've really covered the business side. But here's where I think it gets really interesting for everyone listening. Applying this to your personal life. The source says, stop thinking 50/50. What does that mean day to day? How do you actually become an 80/20 thinker?
Right? Stop thinking 50/50. Basically, it means ditching that default assumption that every hour you spend, every person you interact with, every task on your list, that they all have equal importance or impact. They just don't. Becoming an 80/20 thinker is about cultivating a certain mindset. It's reflective. You're always asking, where's the real leverage here? What's the 20% that matters? It's often unconventional because the answers might go against typical advice. It's even described as hedonistic, not in a bad way, but in the sense of prioritizing what brings you the most joy and effectiveness, focusing on the things that give you disproportionate happiness or results. This kind of thinker, they believe in progress, they think strategically, they're comfortable with nonlinear results. And interestingly, they often combine like huge ambition with a surprisingly relaxed attitude because they know they don't need to sweat everything, just the important stuff.
This really does challenge a lot of common wisdom, doesn't it? Especially around time management. I mean, the source actually says, the point is not to manage your time better. That sounds like heresy to anyone who's ever read a productivity book. So what's this 80/20 time heresy all about?
Oh, it's total heresy for the traditional time blocking crowd.
Yeah.
This 80/20 time heresy basically says, look, time isn't just this empty box you need to fill efficiently minute by minute. It's described more like the benign link between the past, present, and future. The real game changer isn't scheduling every second. It's optimizing what you actually do with the time you have. The material calls it a primer for time revolutionaries. It gives these illustrations of eccentric and effective time use. It might mean, for instance, blocking out huge chunks of time to your absolute highest value work, your deep work. Even if that means completely ignoring a bunch of lower value tasks for a while. It's about focus, not just ticking boxes.
Okay, so if we're not just managing time like accountants, what should we be doing? What are some of those time sinks, the 80% of activities that yield little that this principle helps us see? And conversely, what are the surprising high-value things it points towards?
Yeah, the big realization is that most of what fills our days often produces very little real value. The source lists typical low-value uses of time, things we all recognize, right? Attending meetings you don't need to be in, drowning in email that isn't productive, endless admin tasks. That's often the 80% of stuff that only gives you 20% of your meaningful results. On the other hand, the highest value uses of time, they often involve things like strategic thinking, long-term planning, nurturing those few really key relationships, identifying and tackling the critical problems or opportunities. It's moving from just being busy to being truly effective. And this really does apply everywhere. The source suggests starting with your lifestyle first, then work, figuring out your desired career and lifestyle by identifying those few key elements that bring you the most satisfaction and fulfillment. Then relationships. It suggests compiling your top 20 personal relationships chart. It sounds a bit cold, maybe, but the idea is to recognize who your real village is, the vital few people who truly support you and enrich your life, and consciously nurture those relationships above all others, professionally too. It's about finding a few key allies, building what calls achievement alliances, especially early in your career. A small number of strong partnerships can give you a huge boost. And career success itself. The source points out the clear imbalance in professional success. You see, superstar earnings for top professionals. It argues that achievement has always obeyed the 80-20 principle. It's not just about talent, it's about focused effort on the right things. Identifying your unique 20% strengths or the key opportunities. It even gives 10 golden rules for career success, like focusing on what you do best and actually love doing. Money, no surprise, also follows the 80-20 rule. The source includes Koch's 10 commandments of investment, and they echo this principle. Things like invest in what you know, focus on a few highly profitable ventures. Sugar. It advises against scattering your investments too widely. The idea is that concentrated, smart effort on a few key investments often beats diversification for the sake of it. Find your 20% winners. And finally, happiness. This is fascinating. It talks about 2 ways to be happier, and the key message is you're not powerless. You can actively improve your well-being. How? By strengthening emotional intelligence, changing how you frame events or think about yourself, or even changing the events themselves where possible. It gives practical steps like 7 daily happiness habits and 7 shortcuts to a happy life. A shortcut might be something simple, like spending just 5 focused minutes a day on genuine gratitude. Small input, potentially big boost in well-being. Again, finding that leverage point.
This naturally leads to the bigger picture, doesn't it? Society. Why should society as a whole adopt this 80-20 principle? I can imagine that getting potentially controversial.
It definitely touches on sensitive areas. The source does explore this, asking whether the 80-20 principle is inherently right-wing or if there's maybe a left-wing interpretation. It looks at how different political viewpoints might see this uneven distribution of, say, wealth or outcomes. For some, it might seem to justify meritocracy, arguing that resources just naturally flow to the most productive 20%, and that's okay, maybe even efficient. Others might look at the same 80-20 wealth distribution and see it as evidence of systemic problems, a call for redistribution or policies to address that inequality. And it's really important to state here, for you listening, we're just reporting on these viewpoints presented in the material. We're not taking a side or endorsing any specific political interpretation, just exploring how the principle itself gets viewed through different lenses.
Understood. So regardless of the political lens, the source ultimately seems to frame the principle as a path towards progress, suggesting it asserts the potential for terrific progress and puts the onus on us, individually and collectively, to take responsibility for making that progress happen by focusing on where the real leverage lies.
Wow, what an absolutely incredible journey through the 80-20 principle, from, boosting business profits and slashing complexity, all the way to genuinely revolutionizing your personal time, your relationships, your career, even your happiness. It really is this amazingly versatile, powerful tool. Helps you cut through the noise, navigate complexity, and achieve so much more with less wasted effort. It's truly about working smarter, focusing on what actually counts.
Absolutely. And maybe to leave you with one final thought, something to mull over. If it's true that roughly 80% of your desired results come from just 20% of your actions or input, what is one area, just one in your life or your work right now, where you could identify that vital 20%? What stands out to you as the place where redirecting your focus today could make the biggest difference?